Nicholas Chu to start this webinar. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. My name is Nicholas Chu. I'm the Operations Director at the EWPA, and on behalf of the EWPA, HRA and TSHA, welcome to our MEWPs and Spotters webinar. This is the first of what we hope is a series of webinars which are more relating to safety and technical issues. So we're very thankful to have you joining us. So today we'll be talking about the person outside of the platform, the spotter. And we hope we'll address a number of the frequently asked questions that we get around spotters. We hope to cover what the spotter's role is the spotter always required, and what other activity can the spotter do. And we're very fortunate to be joined by three industry professionals. We have joining us today David Waterfield, who's the WHS manager at WPAC for Victoria and South Australia, Eberhard Rappich, who runs Safety Spotter in Victoria, which is a specialised spotting services company, and also Adam Welch, who will be well known to a lot of you. He's the practice manager at Best Train. So today our focus is on the spotter, but listen, we would encourage you for further guidance around safety related issues. Please do refer to our EWPA Best Practice Guide, which is available as a free resource on the EWPA website. And we'd also just like to reiterate that any operator of an EWP has a requirement to meet the duty of care provisions under the various legislation. That includes having a high-risk work license if it's a boom lift over 11 metres, and we really recommend having a EWPA yellow card for any operation of EWPs to help you meet that duty of care provision. Finally, just a little bit of housekeeping before I hand over. We have the Q&A functionality enabled. If you have any questions, please do type them in here and we'll endeavour to get to them. If we don't get to them, we will circle back and get back to you after the conclusion of the webinar. Secondly, we have the chat function enabled as well. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties in terms of sound or audio or visual, please do just put something on the chat line, and the fabulous Linda and Sally will work behind the scenes to try and resolve that. And finally, this webinar is being recorded and it will be made available after the conclusion of the session. So please feel free to keep an eye out for that and refer back to it as you need be. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Andrew Delahunt. Andrew is our newly appointed Director of Resources at the EWPA, and myself and Andrew go way back, at least 3 weeks now, I want to say. In any case, please enjoy the webinar, and Andrew, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Nick, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. When used correctly, MEWPs are a safe way to access hazardous areas and to conduct work at height. We know that MEWPs are safe. There, however, remains a risk, especially when working near structures, power lines, buildings, and when unloading and loading from transport vehicles. A safe working practice is to have a spotter whenever moving the MEWP and positioning the platform at height. Essentially, the spotter's role is to observe the MEWP and warn the operator about impending hazards. Additionally, they may be required to undertake emergency procedures, including retrieving the work platform from the elevated position. Now, this role is known by various names that are used interchangeably. The spotter, safety observer, sometimes banksman, depends on the industry and where you come from. However, throughout this webinar, we will use the term spotter when talking generally. We will use safety observer specifically for non-electrical observations, and we will use electrical spotter for working near overhead electrical assets. The electrical spotter is a specialised and qualified spotter who observes the MEWP and warns against the unsafe approach to electrical apparatus. Now, perhaps the question is always, do I need a spotter every time I use an MEWP? The answer is both yes, when near electrical apparatus, and it depends on the risk assessment. We can see here on the slide the clearance requirements when near power lines and other electrical poles. Looking at this, it's quite clear to say that in the yellow zone, a spotter is required. However, we also do urge that whenever working near power lines, when you cannot control or there may be a risk of going into that yellow area, that the use of spotter is required. Inside the specified conditions, it is mandatory to use an electrified spotter, that is someone who is qualified and registered. Now we should see this decal on the work platform in every MEWP. Now Eberhard will discuss this in a little bit more detail. When we're talking about general use of MEWPs, not near power lines, the risk assessment will determine if a spotter or safety observer is required and whether they should be employed. The risk assessment needs to identify that the overhead hazards and platform positioning can place the operator at risk, and where that's the case, a spotter should be employed. What we need to remember is that visibility and communication is key between the spotter and operator. And this starts at the before elevation at the planning stage. The two need to work together as a team and understand their responsibilities. Identifying the positioning and the communication method. Walk through the rescue procedure. The spotter is there to save lives. Now, I'd like to introduce David Waterfield, who is a safety manager with over 30 years experience in construction safety. He started out as an elected health and safety rep, and he's worked for a number of major tier 1 contractors. He's an active member of a number of construction safety boards and advisory groups, and now is the WHS manager of Victoria and South Australia at EWPA. I'll hand over to you, David.
Thanks, Andrew. Good afternoon, everyone. I've been passionate about elevated work platforms for a number of years, and I've been involved in the WorkSafe Victoria EWP forum, which is very close to releasing the new EWP industry standard for the operation of mobile elevated work platforms. The passion has come from seeing a lot of incident and injury for people that have been operating elevated work platforms or people that have been delivering them. Some of the specific hazards and risks that are involved stem from right at the very start. So we're talking about transportation and logistics of the MEWP to site. So we need to make sure there's a clear area to unload. We need to make sure that there is no moving traffic in the areas where the machine needs to be unloaded. And we need to make sure that the person that's transporting the elevator work platform is qualified and competent and experienced at doing that task. There have been a number of serious injuries, and even worse, when mobile elevator work platforms have been delivered to site. The next ones we need to look at is the site location. So are we going internal, are we going external, or are we working on the ground? Are we on soil, or are we working on firm level concrete? So we're looking at the ground conditions. We also need to know the qualifications of the persons that are going to operate them for their task. Qualification and competency of mobile elevator work platforms can be a bit daunting, can be a little bit difficult to work out because there are a number of different standards. Some machines will need high-risk work licenses issued by the regulator. The rest of the machines will require some sort of competency, which is generally issued by organisations like the Elevator Work Platform Association of Australia. There are a lot of new machines that are coming out now that have very different and very new features and functions. So they can work on very severe side slopes. They can work on big ramps. Some of them have spider outriggers. Some of them have tracks, and they can be quite daunting. I remember a few years ago, one of these new machines was delivered to a site I was working on with a very experienced safety advisor and a very experienced safety rep, and we didn't have a clue about how to operate this machine. It was just delivered at 6 o'clock in the morning, left there, and someone thought that we could figure out how to operate it ourselves without any instruction. So we probably didn't operate it, and we just waited for someone to come out and show us how to use it and familiarise ourselves with the machine. Some of the high risk trades, so the more problematic or the higher risk trades that generally tend to get themselves into trouble when operating elevated work platforms are the trades that work alone. These trades work alone because the nature of their trade causes problems for the other trades in the area. So I'm talking about people like painters, renderers, welders, boilermakers. And that's because other trades don't like having paint dripped on them, render poured on them, or hot sparks and embers falling down onto them while they're working. So generally these trades tend to work alone a lot. This is where we've experienced a few very serious incidents and worse in the industry because these people have been working alone. There has been either a machine malfunction, there has been an operator error, or there has been a simple misjudgment of the scenario that the people were in, and there's the disasters have occurred. So they're the trades that we need to watch. The other trades, so the electricians, the plumbers, the other people that are sort of working at height, generally speaking, there are a lot of other people around them. So it becomes quite easy to have a spotter in place to assist them. It's vital that the spotter is familiar with the type of machine and the lower ground controls, whether they be ground controls or whether they be the emergency controls. Sometimes they will be the same on a machine. Sometimes they will have different functions on the machine. That's why it's very important that the spotter is aware of those controls and has actually used them and tried them out. For example, if I am doing a safety walk around the site, some of the questions I ask the operator and the people around, have you done your logbook? Have you checked your maintenance? Have you checked your ground conditions? Have you checked your overhead conditions? But very importantly, do you know how to lower this machine in an emergency? And who is on the ground that can operate this machine from the ground if you are trapped at height? Safety professionals will be looking at EWPs in many instances. So we'll be looking at things like safe work method statements. So a mobile elevator work platform on a construction site, it is a regulatory duty that there is a safe work method statement in place for the operator of that machine. It has to be site specific. It has to encompass the risks of operating that machine on that specific site. We'll be looking at competencies, whether you need a regulatory high risk work licence or whether you need a competency such as issued by the Elevator Work Platform Association of Australia. We'll also be looking at some of the very new and specific machines to make sure that someone has familiarised the operator with how to operate that particular type of machine. So it is really not satisfactory to be able to hire a machine or buy a machine and no one provide you a familiarisation or instruction on how to operate that machine. On the safe work method statements, we'll be ensuring that there is a rescue method and that there'll be people in place to perform rescue if it is required. And that is just as simple as lowering the machine to the ground in most instances. Placement of the machine is very important as well. On a number of the very serious incidents that have occurred to date now, the ground controls have been placed hard up against a solid wall. So when the operator became stuck or wedged in between two solid surfaces, the person on the ground could not get to the ground controls to bring the machine down to release the operator easily, resulting in the injury becoming worse or even fatal. That's about it for me. Is there any other questions or any other points that you would like to discuss?
David, thank you very much. There's been some questions. I guess the first question I'd have is, you spoke about checking the familiarisation of the operator. What about, would you verify that the spotter themselves were familiar as well?
Yeah, good point, Andrew. So that's been discussed at length in the industry. So providing the spotter is only providing a rescue function, it would be satisfactory that the spotter has been physically taken through the instructions of the machine, the instructions and controls, and has practiced a descent and a lowering and descending of the machine in emergency conditions. So providing that's documented and could be proven, that would be satisfactory for that specific example.
That's great to hear. That's exactly what we want to hear, that the spotter has that familiarisation with the rescue procedures and has done a walkthrough there. Another question that's raised, you spoke about the difficult site conditions that are quite common nowadays. What about where the spotter stands? Is a spotter needs to be positioned in a particular place? Can the spotter be in the work platform?
No, theoretically the spotter can't be in the work platform because they both could be placed at the same risk. So they could be at the same risk of crushing. So therefore, there wouldn't be someone available to perform the rescue lowering or the rescue descent as required. The spotter would also need to make sure that they are in a position on the ground where they're not at risk from falling objects, and also that they're not at risk of moving objects. You wouldn't believe the amount of injuries that are incurred when mobile elevator work platforms move suddenly, or what I should say is more that other persons move unexpectedly in front or behind a machine while it's moving, or it suddenly starts to move. You see a lot of foot injuries in those circumstances.
Yeah, that's very true, very true. And the last question that's come in is about supervision of the spotters. Like, who is responsible for that spotter on site? And I guess particularly we're talking about maintain over the whole day. They obviously can't remain in position the whole day. They might take meal break or a toilet break. What happens there?
Yeah, no, very, very good point. And also, if the spotter is not actively engaged in the trade that the person in the EWP is carrying out, they are very prone to boredom. Once they're bored, they get distracted. Once they get distracted, they may as well not be there. So it is very important that regular breaks are scheduled and that there is an availability either for the tasks to stop for a brief period of time for toilet breaks and the like, or a replacement is brought in to replace the spotter while they go for meal breaks, toilet breaks, that sort of thing. Particularly in the event that the spotter is carrying out an electrical spotting function. So at the time, that electrical spotter could be the difference between life and death. So you want them to be alert, you want them to be rested, you want them to be fed, and you want them to be watered, because they are observing a machine that's working adjacent to high voltage electrical conductors, and you want them to be as alert as they possibly can be.
Of course, they're humans. And thanks very much, David. It does flow quite well into our next speaker, Eberhard Rabich, who owns a niche spotting business called Safety Spotter. This business started in 2004, operates in Melbourne, Geelong, and other regional Victoria, employs 14 people, and does provide electrical spotters and general spotting services. Over to you, Eberhard.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. I'll talk today about the ticketing requirements for electrical or no-go zone spotters, as they're sometimes called. And I'm also going to touch a little bit about the permits. I'll just make the point before we go into the first slide that our service doesn't provide the actual permits. That we're there to help you comply with the regulations and make sure that the crew are working safely. If we have a new client that's totally green, well, sure, I'll help them through point them in the right direction and get them in through the permit stage. But no, we don't set the conditions themselves. We can go into the first slide if we've got that. This is actually what it will look like. It's an old one that I've dug up from. If you have a look, it's dated 2012, but I've hidden the personal details, but I'll talk a little bit about what the spotter is going to look for on that permit. This is something, it's a document that needs to be available to the spotter because they got to read it, and this also gets incorporated into the SWMS or JSA. Now they're going to be looking at the job name and location, which is up the top. There's a job description. I don't know if you can actually read that. This particular one is for a fascia sign maintenance using a boom lift. It will also list the address. You'll see where that arrow is. There's a pole number there. They're looking for that. The pole numbers are very specific, and usually there's one or two of these pole numbers, and the spotter's got to establish that they're working in location. And precautions are listed if you go down a little bit. In this instance, we've got low voltage bare conductor cable and underground termination, 240, 415 volts, which is your bundled three-phase. There's also high volt lines here at the station, high voltage bare conductor cables, 66,000 volts, 66 kV. That's what they're working with. They're going to look at the date and time that they're correct. Also, the clearances, about halfway down the page, you'll actually then get into the nitty-gritty as to what clearances have got to be maintained and what precautions need to be taken. There's a joint on-site meeting, electrical assets identified, work SWMS, the work and control methods, and working parallel to the building in this case. And it's also specified a little bit further down, there's clearances of 1500 millimetres from the low voltage and 3000 millimetres, 3 metres from the high voltage conductors, clearance from machinery, tools, materials, and personal body clearances. Spotter's also going to be looking that it's been properly validated. The issuing authority will sign off on that, and it's also receipted by the client, usually be the supervisor or foreman that's on site. So it's permit we look a little bit different in different states, but this is what you will expect to see and need to have on site. Going to the second slide, we're going to talk about the ticketing requirements for safety spotter. There's 4. If you count the white card is sort of every job site, you need that to be there. Second point is the ticket. You need to have that, of course, it needs to be current. And the third one is the critical one. Now, in Victoria, Energy Safe Victoria require that electrical spotters have competency on the type of machine under observation. So the high-risk work platform ticket, which is issued by WorkSafe, is required for the boom lifts over 11 metres. Now, under 11 metres, you still need to have competency. And so if they don't have the, if the spotter doesn't have the ticket from WorkSafe, in that case, then the EWPA yellow card is acceptable. That's shown as competency. So that is a critical one. I think Andrew has actually touched on, I'll mention it again in a little while. The third bullet point, the fourth bullet point, of course, is first aid level 2, and that leads into the CPR, which is an annual refresher ticket. We can go to the next slide, and this is actually an example of what they're going to look like. These are actually my own tickets. You'll see up on the top left-hand corner, the construction induction card, white card, spotter certificate in Victoria. That's issued by Energy Safe. It's a yellow card, and bottom left-hand corner has also got the high-risk ticket. You'll see on both of those, there's codes, and they're they're actually what they indicate to you what the competencies are. If you can make out the coding on mine, it's got DG, which is doggers, LF happens to be a forklift, and then WP greater than 11 meters. So I have both dogging and work platform competencies. If you're in any doubt, that the back of the spotter certificate has actually got the coding and what it stands for. Those codes will also appear on the high-risk work ticket. That's if you haven't got the EWPA yellow code competencies also. Now, the other two tickets there on the right-hand side, and of course, which you're going to want to see on the job site are the first aid and the CPR refresher. Check the currency. I've got the CPR, which on mine I think is due next month. We can go on to slide 4, and this is where I want to mention the actual, this is important. The term spotter is defined by Energy Safe Victoria. We're talking about electrical spotters. The term spotter is defined by Energy Safe Victoria as a safety observer who is a person competent for the sole task of observing and warning against unsafe approach to overhead power lines and other electrical apparatus. Key wording here is the sole task of observing and warning against unsafe approach. And I want to stress this, that it's very, very important that your spotter is, if it's an electrical spotter, that's what they're doing, that's their sole task. They can't be there watching multiple machines, 2 or 3 booms going at the same time. That's asking for trouble. The only exception for that would be maybe a situation where you might have a boom lift for front of the sign. Back of the sign, you're using a scissor. So in those situations, you're only using one type of EWP at a time. So that's still okay, but not when they're operating simultaneously. The other problem that can arise is that the spotter is there to do other jobs. I've had reports where that's happened, and in those situations, you may have like someone set there from a traffic management company or labour hire, and they're doing traffic management. They're looking to the right. They're standing there sort of looking to the right for one side, traffic coming from the left, and they're looking straight up and watching the operator on the boom. They can't do that. That's impossible. When something goes wrong, something's going to go wrong very, very quickly. Also want to mention that the competencies and the reasons that you need to have those tickets and why it's such a big requirement is the emergency situations, that if you do need to get the operator down. I've had one sort of instance in 16 years, which I'm lucky, but it was one that was very easy to sort out. The controls weren't working, and I jiggled around with the controls on the base, put it down to the base control and back up the top, and it worked. So I think there was something wrong with the controls, but that got us out of trouble and it was easily sorted. I've had one spotter that's actually done an emergency descent. The other situation can arise, of course, is first aid. You need the first aid tickets. Again, touch wood, nothing's happened for me, but they're going to be the ones that are there with the crew, and they're going to be first on the scene in most cases. Now, I will mention quickly, the spotter is there to help, not hinder. They will, they're not there to do other jobs, but there's certainly, I have no problem that if they're helping set up at the beginning of the day, back up the signs later on, that sort of thing. They need to be inducted and sign on to the crew SWMS. David did mention the responsibility of one of the questions that was raised. On the job site, they're answerable to the site supervisor. I guess I'll answer that question. And the site supervisor or the foreman, I mean, they're employed by me, but they're part of a crew, and on the day from start to finish. They're answerable to that and part of a team. I'll summarise just quickly. Make sure you got the right tickets for the spotter. Check the insurance company that whoever you're dealing with has got the insurance cover for spotting role. Look at the permit conditions. Your spotter will help out with that. And integrate them into the team and make them part of your crew. Just finally, I'll go into questions, but I'll put the caveat onto all this that your mileage may vary. I'm based in Victoria, so could be different interstate, but the general thrust of it, I think, will be the same right across Australia. I mean, ultimately, I'd like to see regulations sort of consistent across all of Australia. Looking forward to that day. But yeah, open to questions.
Thank you very much, Eberhard. Terrific little summary there. First question I will go with is, you talked about working as a team. How do you engage with the site team? I mean, do you join a toolbox talk?
Yes, absolutely. The spotter should actually be one of the first people on site, because I also need to look at it is sometimes you have an electrical spotter and they're only working in the yellow zone in those situations. But yes, so they need to be totally integrated into the crew, that everybody understands, well, yes, if something goes wrong, the spotter's got a whistle, or might be using two-way. Those sort of things have all got to be clarified, and they should be embedded into the JSA or SWMS.
Yeah, okay, great to know. And the follow-up question is it the spotter's ticket that you've spoken about, the accreditation from Energy Safe Victoria, is there a nationally accredited training course?
Not yet. Yeah, we wish.
Okay.
Again, this is Energy Safe Victoria issue 1. I expect sort of most other sort of authorities in the state will do.
Yeah, so we know each of the state authorities have their courses, and so, but there's nothing national. Okay. Again, thank you very much, Eberhard. It's very informative and terrific. We'll now hand over to our final speaker, Adam Welch. Adam has been a branch manager, operations manager, and recently transport and logistics manager. He has more than 20 years experience in the rental industry. Adam's been instrumental in developing the COATS policy on loading and unloading of mobile equipment to and from transport vehicles. So over to you, Adam.
Thanks, Andrew, and good afternoon to everyone. Yes, most people probably who know my name would associate it with Coates Hire. I spent 17 years with Coates Hire, and I've recently moved on from there. I wear a few hats nowadays, and one of those is with an organisation called Best Train. So, quick plug: Best Train are a gap between traditional consultants and technology vendors. So, consulting, technology, supply chain, all that type of stuff. Transport management systems, telematics, that type of software. So we'll move on to the next slide. So I just wanted to start with this slide. It's a little infographic we developed at Coates Hire just to try and delineate the difference between chain of responsibility incidents and work health safety incidents that revolve around transport. So the left-hand side of the road, if you like, the truck with the witches' hats in front of it, is depicting incidents that may occur that would involve work health and safety, whereas the truck on the right-hand side, which is meant to look like it's in motion, is relating to chain of responsibility issues. So rough rule of thumb that we've used is if a vehicle is in motion, more than likely any incidents that occur are chain of responsibility related, so falling under the heavy vehicle national law, as opposed to if the vehicle's stationary, so loading, unloading, that type of activity, any incidents are more work health and safety related. So if we move on to the next slide. So spotting became a part of Coates Hire more than 10 years ago, and it was born out of necessity. We had a number of incidents where pieces of equipment were making their own way off trucks. And we found that by introducing a spotter to the loading and unloading activities whilst they were occurring in our branches, took away a lot of that risk. It's an extra set of eyes, making sure that things like winches are engaged and connected properly, and that type of activity. So the version that we're seeing on the screen at the moment, those posters are in the load unload zones of every Coates Hire branch, as well as lunchrooms and meeting rooms. That's probably version 20, I'm not quite sure. We've revised that a lot over the years, but ultimately it's about loads that are being driven, winched or freewheeled to or from a transport vehicle. If we could move on to the next slide. More recently, we've introduced safe zones, or load unload exclusion zones as they're sometimes known. And again, this was born out of necessity. A number of incidents where people and mobile equipment were coming in close contact with each other during loading and unloading activities. So the poster we're seeing there, again, these are printed on large pieces of core flute and placed around every load unload zone within the Coates Hire network, and clearly depicts where a safe zone for a spotter to be is. This one here is about tilt trays and low loaders, so the footprints are to indicate that the spotter needs to move along with the piece of equipment as it's being loaded or unloaded. And the reasoning behind that is to make sure that the spotter and the operator are able to maintain a level of eye contact and communication. Next slide, please. So this, again, is a safe zone, but where a forklift's involved. So obviously the opposite side of the vehicle is the absolute danger zone when a forklift's being used to load or unload a truck. We've got two safe zones shown there, one beside the cab of the truck, only used if the forklift operator needs some assistance in positioning the load on the truck. So, a wide load, think of, a site shed or traffic barriers or something like that. Or if that's not the case, so say we're just loading 19-foot scissor lifts onto a semi with a forklift, then the spotter and driver stay outside the exclusion zone, out in the safe zone outside. The next slide, please. So like just about every hire company in the world, drawing perfect rectangles on a piece of paper depicting safe zones and load unload zones and good, but no one's got those perfect yards where you can lay out a safe zone like that. So the rule of thumb we used was that the safe zone must have a physical barrier around it. And that was just to protect people from inadvertently wandering into the zone. And when a safe zone's set up, such as in those pictures there, it's the spotter who manages that safe zone. He or she's in control of all of the operations that are happening as the piece of equipment's being loaded or unloaded. The next slide, please. And just to make sure spotters are safe, we had a number of different ways where we could depict the safe zone for the spotter. A bit blurry, but top right corner, there's some green witches hats where that driver's sitting. We have, in some cases where we don't need the driver involved at all, we created spots for them to go and sit. We actually, that one there is on a lovely sunny day in Brisbane, but we've also got shaded areas if the driver's there for a long period of time. Or a piece of green astroturf or something like that, that the spotter can move around with them if need be when a load unload zone may not be as permanent as some. Next slide, please. So all of that's great while you're in a Coates Hire or any other branch during business hours, but out on the side of the road or on a customer site, generally a driver's on their own. Now, whilst we do ask that a driver tries to get someone to help in the spotting. That's not always the case. Sometimes sites aren't manned, sometimes there's no one available. So we've created a transport JSEA. And this version is only about 8 or 10 months old. And it's more give the driver the opportunity to think through what's actually going on there rather than giving them a great big tick and flick to fill in. So cut into sections to try and help them work through each component. And it captures the key risks, and we've based that on the experience of people within our business and our drivers and our contract drivers. And it focuses more on, as I say, the think and describe rather than a tick and flick. Next slide. I think that's me. Thank you. Thanks, Andrew.
Terrific. Thanks, Adam. It's obviously quite a very great system, very sophisticated system. At a hire company within the yard, would there be a dedicated spotter every time when it comes for machines going off hire and coming back in? Yeah,
absolutely, mate. So whenever it fits the criteria of being winch driven or freewheeled to or from a transport truck, then a spotter is required. The only time a spotter wouldn't be required is on some occasions with a forklift, where you can actually use the truck driver as the spotter, as long as that driver's standing in the safe zone outside of the exclusion zone that we saw before. But sites that run, predominantly access equipment, as an example, definitely every move would be involving a spotter.
Interesting. Very interesting. Thank you. And finally, when you spoke about using the JSEA for on-site or after hours, have you had pushback from your customers about using such a system?
Oh, very rarely. Occasionally you'll get a customer who just wants a driver to hurry up and get out of the way. And, we're sadly a fair way down the food chain some days, and we are in the way, but 99.9% of people understand that completing that JSEA is an important step in ensuring the activity is undertaken safely.
Good to hear. That is good to hear. So thanks again, Adam. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll just have a couple of questions have been put through on the chat, and David's answered them, but I thought I'd read them out. So the question has been, if it's an EWP is being used by a repair person, is a spotter required? And here we're suggesting that anytime that machine needs to travel or the platform to be raised and there's a risk of striking persons, plant or structure, then a spotter is required. And the final question, for the spotter signing on in the logbook, is that sufficient record to know how the machine works for the spotter to sign the operator safety check, section 1 in the yellow logbook? And I think David's quite correct here in saying that the best way to record that is on the SWMS, the Safe Work Method Statement. And that has a reference to the operator and the spotter being familiar with the MEWP controls. So thanks again. I'll hand back to Nick for a final wrap up.
Thanks for that, Andrew. And thank you very much to David, Eberhard and Adam for just providing that wealth of information to our members. As I said at the start of the session, this is recorded, so you will get access to this after the session has concluded. And I'd really encourage you to share it amongst your colleagues. If there's one piece of information that they can take out of this webinar, that may help save a serious incident or worse occurring. Any questions that haven't been answered, we will endeavour to circle back and get in contact with the people that have asked that question. But finally, I'd like to thank everyone for logging on for this webinar. As I said, it's the first in hopefully a series. Safety is always one of the core pillars of how the EWPA, HRA and TSHA operate. It's one of our real focuses. So we'd really encourage you to use all the resources that are available, and also please do log in for future webinars and let your colleagues know that they're on as well. But on behalf of all of the associations, thank you very much for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you.